2024, I completed my Appalachian Trail Thru-Hike, starting on February 21st and ending on July 21st. I was out there in the woods for 5 months. One of the things that I learned while being out there was always being willing to adjust the gear that I had in my bag, therefore sending a lot of items home. Today, I'm going to share with you a list of the items that I wound up sending home while on my Thru-Hike. The first piece of gear that I wound up sending home was within the first 20 days, and it was this right here. If you watched any of my pre-trail videos, you know I went out there with a no-cook food plan, but I did wind up carrying a stove with me in case I did want to cook anything and or I wanted to make a cup of coffee. In the first 20 days, I wound up making 2 cups of coffee, so carrying this additional weight was no longer a priority for me, and I wound up sending that thing home. The second piece of gear that I wound up sending home was my microfiber towel. I wound up carrying 2 microfiber towels out there on the Appalachian Trail because of Leo hiking with me, so therefore I thought I was going to need one for me and one for Leo. Again, I wound up not using one of those towels the majority of the time and only utilizing one towel, so any duplication had to be got rid of. The third thing that I wound up sending home was my Smoky Mountain preparation kit. This was what I was carrying with me to get through the Smoky Mountains. First was a pair of ice cleats for my shoes that I would be able to put over my shoes if I was going to be dealing with snow and ice in the Smoky Mountains. Second was a sleeping bag liner. And the third thing was hot hands. All right, so I had different variations of hot hands for the body and also for gloves and things like that. The reason why I didn't wind up using any of these was because when I went through the Smoky Mountains, it was in early March and I hit a 3 or 4 day window where I had highs of 60 and lows of 40, therefore making all of this equipment useless, and I was no longer going to carry things that I didn't need. The fourth thing that I wound up sending home was my Moreno wool sleeping long johns. I had a long sleeve shirt as well as long pants to help get me through the winter. As soon as I started getting nights in the 30s and 40s, my 20-degree sleeping bag became hot with these items. Therefore, I would wind up sleeping in a t-shirt and underwear most of the time. So carrying this additional weight was no longer necessary, so I sent those bad boys back to the house. The fifth thing that I wound up sending home was my winter pants. I started out hiking in late February and it was very cold on trail, so I was using pants every single day. As soon as it hit about mid-March or later into March, I wound up hiking in shorts way more than pants, so I wound up sending my winter pants back to the house. Now the sixth thing that I wound up sending home was an experimentation. I was talking to one of the other hikers while I was out there, and I wound up purchasing this mesh shirt. Now, the mesh shirt is designed and supposed to be used for winter, but I thought that the mesh shirt would also be a good piece of gear to have for the summer, being that it would be so breathable. However, I was wrong, and wearing the mesh shirt did actually make me hot. Now, I do plan on testing the mesh shirt again in the winter time, but being that I was going through the Shenandoahs and it was warm most of the time, the mesh shirt didn't wind up working out, so I wound up sending that bad boy home. The seventh thing that I wound up sending home was my layering system. I had several different layers that I started out the trail with, starting with my Mirage, also my Alpaca Gear 80/20 hoodie, as well as my 4-class puffy. They kept me nice and toasty in combination, sometimes wearing one, sometimes wearing 1 and 2, sometimes wearing 1 and 2, sometimes wearing all 3. They definitely got me through plenty of cold times. However, once it started to warm up, I wound up switching them out for my Unbound Moreno wool hoodie, as well as in combination with my Alpha Senchi fleece. Those 2 items right there, whether I was just using one or using the other, wound up being more breathable for the cooler temperatures, but yet if it did get cold, they also would definitely keep me warm in those later months of my hike. And the 8th and final piece of gear that I wound up sending home was my 20-degree Hammock Quilt. This quilt definitely kept me warm throughout all of the beginning of the hike, whether it was in the Smokies or north of that when it got down into the 20s and sometimes even the teens at night. However, once the months went on and the temperatures started to rise, I was getting very, very hot utilizing this quilt, being that it was 20 degrees. So I started looking for a replacement. That's when I found the UGQ Quillow. The UGQ Quillow is rated for 50 degrees, and I'm a very, very warm sleeper, so I wound up buying this thing, and it got me through the last 2 months of my hike, and it wound up being a fantastic replacement for my 20-degree quilt. So I went from 20 degrees to 50 degrees. There is some things that you could probably bridge that gap with, but being a hot sleeper, this was plenty for me to get through the last 2 months of my thru hike. Now, those are all the pieces of gear that I wound up sending home, being that I was on the trail for 5 months. Seasons change, needs change. Therefore, I was willing to always make a change to make my hike more comfortable and so that I could be successful reaching Katahdin, which I did. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you will, like, subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the next one.